Welcome to Next Level Play Therapy, a weekly podcast dedicated to supporting the next generation of child and adolescent therapists to provide exceptional play therapy services. We'll explore all things play therapy to elevate your work with children and adolescents using the therapeutic powers of play. I'll discuss practical tips and ideas so you can provide a transformative experience for your young clients and make a real difference in their lives. So get ready to take your play therapy skills to the next level and make a lasting impact in the lives of children, adolescents, and families. Hey there, welcome to this week's episode of Next Level Play Therapy. So today I wanted to talk about using sand tray in play therapy. And these are the questions that come up every time, especially when I'm doing my sand tray trainings, which I do in-person sand tray trainings, because I think it's really important as play therapists to get your hands in that sand tray, choosing those miniatures, creating your scenes, and fully experience the power and depth of using this modality, the sand tray. One of the things that I love about so I have a training coming up this weekend. Registration is going to close on Thursday, tomorrow. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end if you're interested. But one of the things that I love about the topic that I'm going to cover on this weekend is that whole idea of using a neuroscience and attachment lens with the sand tray in play therapy. One of the things that I love about that is that whole, I'm going to use a really fancy word, embodied aspect of how experiences are stored implicitly, meaning we don't have conscious awareness to them in the moment, and they're kind of stored away in there. And then they're still in there. It's not like they go away. And so I think even doing the trainings, I think there's an embodied experience, to use a really fancy word. And I try to not use those really fancy words just because not everybody really fully understands what that means. And it sounds kind of, I don't know, sounds a little bit hoity-toity sometimes. I don't mean it that way. And it is a really good word, though. Like, I love that word. And so that's one of the things that I love about sand tray is how it can access those things. And I can tell, Brill, that you are trying to get you LinkedIn connected because things keep showing up on my screen here. So if you're joining us live or if you're watching the replay, we have been having some technical difficulties with LinkedIn. So we're just going to proceed. Today's topic is 4 basic skills that you need when you're using the sand tray in play therapy. And I call them basic skills because essentially these are skills that you need regardless of your play therapy model, and they will be influenced by your play therapy model. And these are the questions that I get asked all the time when I am talking with play therapists about how to use the sand tray in play therapy. So I thought this would be a really good topic to cover. It's one that I covered about probably 3 years ago. And it's one of those I call an oldie but a goodie. And so I thought it would be helpful to talk about it again. And so today's topic is building skills using sand tray effectively in play therapy. And we're going to cover four basic skills that every play therapist wants to know when they're using the sand tray. Okay, first one is, how do you introduce the sand tray? And the answer is, it depends. Depends on your play therapy model. For example, child-centered play therapy, you're not going to introduce it. It'll be in your playroom. You'll have a sand tray. You'll have miniatures if you choose to have those in your playroom. And if you're using child-centered play therapy, then you're going to still use the same type of tracking skills, but also you're still following. You're not leading. And if you're introducing it, then you're leading. So you're following and you're just going to use your typical child-centered play therapy skills. There are a couple across most of the other models are either directive or kind of a hybrid of sometimes you follow, sometimes you lead. Like Adlerian play therapy, sometimes you follow, sometimes you lead. Gestalt play therapy, sometimes you follow, sometimes you lead. Most integrative play therapy models, you're going to either be directive, meaning you're leading, or you're going to be following. So these next two things that I'm going to talk about really are what most of the other play therapy models will use, and that is you can either do a non-directive prompt or you can do a directive prompt. And in what I call a non-directive prompt is the way that I was trained way back in the day, using the prompt of you can create a world in the sand. So that would be a non-directive prompt. Or maybe a little more directive would be you can create a safe world or your ideal world. Those are still pretty generic and very open-ended. What I like about those is that you can get so many opportunities or options, like what you can see, the possibilities. That's the word that I was trying to find in my brain. The possibilities of what can unfold in the sand tray with a much more generic prompt is higher than if you use a directive prompt. But sometimes if you're working on specific things or specific issues in play therapy using the sand tray, then you're going to have more specific targets to focus on. I say that hesitantly because I don't know if targets is the right word either, but it's still a good word and we'll go with that one. So more directive, meaning you're working on specific things. So for example, one prompt that I may use that's a directive prompt if I'm using more of an integrative or prescriptive play therapy approach. I say integrated, but I don't know. Prescriptive is still a good one. Play therapy. So let's say I have a child who has a pretty significant anxiety. And let's say one of the things that is happening because of this high level anxiety is they're having nightmares. And they're having nightmares frequently. So maybe I want to target exploring what is going on with those nightmares and see if I can figure out what's activating this, and also access the therapeutic powers of play for indirect teaching or maybe even direct teaching. And so I might give the prompt of use the miniatures that best represent your nightmare and create that in the sand tray. Oftentimes I'll give my clients the option of either using art or the sand tray. So I'll let them choose if they want to use the sand tray, if they want to use art. So if they're using the sand tray, Then they're going to choose the miniatures and arrange them in the sand tray. And then we're going to explore that. And we can do some kind of indirect teaching in terms of maybe integrating a little narrative therapy and giving voice and using story to explore what are the cognitive distortions going on in that are creating, maybe activating some of this anxiety. So if I'm using a directive prompt, you might have noticed that I'm also probably using more of an integrative approach, where I might be using a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy if I'm exploring some of that, those cognitive distortions to find out what's activating the anxiety. And in this particular case, it would be what might be contributing to these nightmares that are going on, and exploring that. I could also use a little narrative therapy to use story to give it a little more metaphor and stay in that metaphor to explore what's going on. So you can see how your play therapy model, your theoretical model, is going to influence what you do in the play therapy room. And in this specific case, how you're using the sand tray in the play therapy process. So introducing the sand tray, those are, you can either, if you're a child-centered play therapist and you're using child-centered play therapy and you have that sand tray in there with the miniatures, then you're just going to use it however you use sand tray. I mean, however you use child-centered play therapy. And then with the other play therapy models that you might be using, you can either use a directive or even a non-directive prompt. A non-directive prompt is going to be much more general and allow for a lot more possibilities for you to get a sense of what's going on in there. But if you really want to target and you want to hone in, then you can use a directive prompt. The other skill that comes up a lot in terms of questions I get asked, how you use the sand tray in play therapy has to do with boundaries. So can you have boundaries in play therapy? Yes, you can have boundaries. And what exactly might that look like with the sand tray? And again, I'm going to say whatever your play therapy model is greatly going to influence even how you set boundaries and what boundaries you set. For example, with child-centered play therapy, you're going to use that ACT model of setting the boundaries, and it's going to dictate what type of boundaries are you going to set. For example, when I'm using the sand tray, I typically have the same boundary regardless of whether I'm using child-centered play therapy or whether I'm using a different modality. And the one that is consistent across whatever model I'm using is the sand stays in the sandbox, like that. And you can't get in the sandbox. So those are my two, regardless what I'm using. The sand stays in the sandbox and you can't get in the sandbox. If I have more than one kind of sand in the play therapy room, like maybe I have two different types of sand trays and they both have different colored sands, then I'm going to set another. This is me personally. Your limits, you're going to figure out. Part of limit setting in play therapy is what are some personal limits you need to set in order to be congruent with unconditional positive regard and empathy with each one of your clients. I would say that's true regardless of what play therapy model you're using. And it's also true with child-centered play therapy. So these are limits that I set And you might agree with these, you might not agree with these. You might want to set different ones. Here's the sand stays in the sandbox because I don't want sand everywhere. And I get the expensive sand. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go, why I do that. But I don't want to be, I'm going to be going through sand like water through a sieve, one of those pasta strainers. I'm going to be buying so much sand, and that doesn't work for me. It's expensive. Then I'm going to not enjoy play therapy sessions. I might not enjoy that client, which means now I need to set a personal boundary. And so I set that one to protect the relationship first and foremost, because if I have to be buying sand all the time, I'm not going to be liking it. So that's why I set that limit. Plus, it's really hard to clean up and it takes a lot of time and it gets in the carpet. If you have carpet or you're always sweeping up your floor, you're going to be doing that anyway because it's not always going to stay in the sandbox. Hence why you have to set that limit. So those are the ones that I use across whatever play therapy modality that I'm using. The other limits or boundaries or rules that I set are, I put the sand tray miniatures away. I have that rule because a couple of things. First and foremost, I want to make sure I get all the sand off the miniature so I don't have like an inch layer. That's a little exaggeration, but I don't have a ton of sand on my shelves. I'm going to have sand on my shelves, which means I'm going to be cleaning my shelves a lot. So if I want to cut down on how often and how much sand I'm cleaning off my shelves, then I make the rule that I put the miniatures away. And first, the reason is I want to get all the sand off it before it goes back on the shelf. Two, I want to make sure it goes back where it's supposed to go. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about organizing next. But I want to make sure it goes back where it's supposed to go. And I want to cut down on the likelihood that my miniatures are going to disappear and go in little pockets, never to return. It does happen. So that's another thing I'll cover in the next point. But I put the sand tray, I put the miniatures away. That's my rule. And I also keep out like a little plastic tray for a couple of reasons. One, for the reason I'm about to say, which is if you decide not to use the sand tray miniature, you can just put it in the container here that I keep on the floor. And then that way, in my mind, if they want to use it again, they just grab it out of the tray and I don't have to clean it off, put it on the shelf, and then they choose it again. And then we go back and forth. It's just easier for them. I feel like it's easier for them. And I'm less intrusive if I just let them put it in the bin. And then if they want to use it again, they can. And then if they put it in that little plastic tray, then it gives me the opportunity later to clean them off before I put them back on the shelves. So that's another one. And so the other question that comes up is, do you need to have a separate room for your sand tray miniatures and the sand tray from your playroom? Some people do that. If you have the ability to do that and you like doing that, I would say by all means do it. I like having it. I've had it both ways. I typically would have the sand tray and the miniatures on the shelves in the playroom. I think either is fine if you want to have the sand tray miniatures in a completely separate room versus having them in your playroom. And sometimes there's the practical aspect of you don't have enough money to pay for a very big, gigantic office. Like you don't generate the revenue to be able to support having all these fancy options. And so maybe you need to keep them all in the same room. So if you have them, if you have the sand tray miniatures and the sand tray in your playroom, and then here's another limit that I set when I have that. And my limit is, because I like having Nerf guns with those Nerf darts in the playroom. My rule is you can't shoot the sand tray miniatures. My other rule is you can't take your hand and make them all fall down. And the other rule is you can't play with the miniatures on the shelves, because then they all get knocked down and it's a disaster. Trust me on that one. So if they're in there, those are the rules that I set just for practical purposes. One is to protect the toys because I don't want them getting damaged. And two is protect my time because I don't have time to set up those sand tray miniatures every single time. So those are the boundaries. And the whole point of boundaries really is, like I said, to protect the relationship, to protect the toys, and to protect you. Like my other rule is you can't shoot me with the Nerf gun darts because I don't like being shot with the Nerf gun darts. So that kind of just keeps a little structure. I look at boundaries as structure. This is how we do relationship in my playroom. And we do relationship this way because it helps me to make sure that I can protect this therapeutic relationship and access unconditional positive regard and empathy, so you can have that felt sense of, I think you're the most awesome kid in the world. We need boundaries. So then the third skill, or the third point, is organizing. This question comes up a lot. How do I organize? Should I have them standing? Can I have them in bins or little buckets? How should I organize them and why? So from a traditional sand play, and in other videos, I've discussed the difference between sand play and sand tray. Those are different. So, but for the sake of today's video and live stream, I will just say, from a traditional sand play standpoint, the reason that you stand up your miniatures on the shelves is so that the unconscious, when the unconscious is looking at the shelves, the unconscious will see the miniatures and be drawn toward the miniatures that need to be used to work through whatever it is that needs to be worked through. From a neuroscience and attachment standpoint, I would say your implicit experiences will, when you're using the sand tray, you will be naturally drawn towards, because they're all standing up and you can see them, you'll be naturally drawn toward whatever implicit experiences you're working through for healing in that moment. So standing them up and organizing them into categories allows your client the ability to choose the miniatures that they need. It's more challenging when they're in like bins or little containers, because they have to sort through the containers. That's not to say I don't use containers. I do. Some things just don't stand up very well, and I put them in containers. But also I like to use the gems, those little gems. So I'll put those in containers, because otherwise they're just spread all over your shelves. So some things naturally need a little bit of a container. If you are traveling and you don't have your own office, but let's say you go into people's homes, then what I would say is you're going to need the containers. And what I would say is, if you're using containers, just have categories in each container. So have categories of dinosaurs or categories of pirates. or categories of fences. Just keep them separated into categories. And if you're using the containers, I would label them because I think it's a little easier to find them, and that way you can kind of know which ones you want to use. So, I was just looking at my comments. Mostock, how are you? You're watching from YouTube. Yes, I usually you and I connect on LinkedIn, but StreamYard's not connecting to LinkedIn today. So I'm glad you were joining. It's good to see you. So Ashley Mostock and I connected on LinkedIn probably like 2 years ago, chatting about play therapy. And I'm going to brag on you a little bit because I think it's just so cool what you're doing. Ashley Mostock is, I think you're still in Bangladesh, is really working to bring play therapy to children and families in Bangladesh, which I think is so exciting. Anyways, welcome. That's so cool you're here. All right, so back focus. Sorry, I get a little distracted with the comments. Plus, I like connecting with people. So organizing. The other thing that you want to keep in mind is, regardless of if you are using containers or if you're standing them up or you're using a combination of both, you want to have them organized into categories. The reason for that is it's easier for your clients to find them. So in the playroom, we keep our playroom organized. We keep things in the same place because our clients will come back week after week and they know exactly where they need to go in order to find whatever it is they're working on that particular day in the playroom. The same is true for the sand tray miniatures. You want to have them in the same place because when your clients come in, they are thinking about that sand tray. They are thinking about what they want in their sand tray world or what it is they're going to be making that week. And they're going to go straight to those sections. So that consistency builds a sense of safety and familiarity, breeds a little bit of safety in there with your clients and helps them get to do whatever that work is that they need to do in the playroom. So you want to keep them organized, keep them in the same place. I'm probably going to label them. I used to take like a labeler on my shelves. You can't see in this video because I moved all my sand tray miniatures to a new office to have, so I can do my trainings in a different office rather than here at home in my home office. And eventually I have so many, I'm never moving again. There's I have thousands. And so what I like to do is I used to label them. So then we knew where all the sand tray miniatures go. I just like being organized. You don't need to label your shelves, but if you're an organized person like me, you like to make the labels, that can be helpful. And then you always want to make sure that the shelves are clean. So you're going to have to keep them clean. I like to keep a little small paintbrush, like one that's like an inch. And then I just dust the shelves off using the paintbrush. It's easier. Also, I use that to clean off the miniatures before I put them onto the shelves. So just kind of like a little organizing, cleaning tool. And if you take one of those pasta strainers, I use the kind of the metal mesh kind with the handle. When they have a ton of miniatures in the sand tray, especially a lot of jewels or maybe a lot of little tiny miniatures, you can use that little sifter, like pasta strainer, and scoop them up and sift out the sand before you put them all in your little plastic tray and then put them away from there. Just a little tip. And then the third thing that gets asked a lot is choosing sand and sand trays. Like, does the sand matter? I would say most people, myself included, use what I call the starter sand, the kind that you can get in the, like the home supply, like the home, we have like Home Depot and Lowe's, the home hardware store. Those of you that are not in the US, you probably call it those stores where they have all the things to remodel your home and tools and all those kinds of things, or the craft place where they have the sand, or wherever you buy sand for your outdoor sandbox. The problem with that sand is it's very, very dusty, and it is like a nuclear, because what's going to happen is your client is going to sift the sand and move the sand and pour the sand. And then what happens with that really dusty sand is you get like this nuclear cloud of dust in your coffee. It's horrible. So for that reason, I always recommend invest in more expensive sand. Like you can go on play therapy supplies, or what is that? You can probably get it on Amazon. It's called Sandtastic. And you can get it in different colors. I use the white. I call that the other starter sand. It is a little dusty, but it's nowhere near as dusty as the other one. I call that like the mid-range price for sand, because it still is a little bit dusty, but it's not as bad as the other cheap sand. The best sand is Jurassic sand, and you can go to Jurassic Sand website. They don't have dust. It is more expensive. It is worth it though. And if you go on my website, scroll through way back, go back through, not my website, if my YouTube channel, you go on my YouTube channel, Cathi Spooner, Renewing Hearts, scroll back on the live tab till you find the one about sand. I've done a couple of previous episodes on sand, and I even had the Jurassic Sand people. I love them. The Jurassic Sand, you can get different textures, you can get different colors. It's all natural, and they make sure to take the dust out, and they guarantee there's no dust. So that one's more expensive. It's definitely worth it though, if you have the ability to do that. You just need one 25-pound box for a sand tray. I typically only use half a 25-pound box in my standard size sand trays, and then I have the rest to refill as needed. So for the sand, the other thing I get asked is, does the color of the sand matter? And I would add to that, does the texture? I would say it just gives a different experience. Is there one that you need to have? I don't think so. I think it's just preference. The neutral sand is what people are used to. I call it the starter sand. If you want to have other options for sand for your clients to use, then you can have that available. I set the rule though, if you have more than one sand tray, sand available in different sand trays, like maybe you have 2 sand trays available and they have different kind of sand in it. My rule is you can only use one at a time, because here's what happens. It's like your Play-Doh. When you let kids mix your Play-Doh, then it's no longer green or blue Play-Doh. It's mushed up Play-Doh. And that's what happens to your sandbox. It's no longer like, maybe like in the past, I've had different kinds of sand. And what would happen is I had white sand and I had black sand, and they would use both. And then both sand trays were now black and white sand. And I didn't have a white sand tray or a black sand tray. I had 2 salt and pepper colored sand trays. So that's up to you, personal preference. I don't let them mix the sand. And so you can decide. I think it's a preference. I have found that the different colors and the different textures give the experience a different experience. The size of the sand tray, typically like the standard traditional sand tray is the rectangular sand tray with blue inside. Maybe it's a wooden sand tray and it's painted blue inside, or maybe it's just a blue plastic one. The theory behind the blue on the inside is that blue can represent water or sky. And so they can create water by moving the sand around, create an ocean, create a pond, create a river. That's the benefit of having the blue on the inside. Nowadays, you can get the octagonal shapes. You can get the round, like I have a big old round sand tray, which is awesome. Those create different experiences as well. With a round sand tray, there's no corners. With an octagonal sand tray, there's kind of a lot of corners. With a traditional rectangle, there's 4 corners. And so what happens in the sand tray based on the shape gives a different experience for the builder of the sand tray. Do you get a big one or a small one? Typically, the standard size rectangle sand tray, the theory is it's what your eye can take in with that container, because the sand tray is the container for that unconscious material, or as I would say, all those implicit experiences. And the sand tray is the container for that. And the sand is what anchors and grounds the builder through that experience. And what do they do with the sand? What do they do with the miniatures in that sand? And then the miniatures are the symbolic representation of what's going on in there. So those are the 4 basic skills for using the sand tray, pretty much regardless of your play therapy model. We kind of broke down the essentials of using the sand tray in play therapy, how to introduce the sand tray using both directive and non-directive prompts, how to organize your sand tray, what kind of boundaries you can use, and then some reasons, or not reasons, but some ideas or tips or things to consider when you are choosing sand and choosing what type of sand tray that you want to use. So that is it for today. If you found the information useful, feel free to share it across your social media platforms. Feel free to comment. I'd love to hear your feedback, your ideas, the things that you're doing with sand tray. So feel free to post in the comments. I forgot to say that at the beginning because I got a little distracted by the fact that we couldn't connect to LinkedIn today. For those of you watching the replay on LinkedIn, I'm sorry. We were having technical difficulties today. And for those of you watching the replay on Instagram or YouTube or in my Facebook group or LinkedIn, feel free to comment. Feel free to share the information. If you're watching on YouTube, I would love it if you would follow the channel. You'll get notified every time I go live when there's a new video in there. And if you're listening on the podcast, I would love to hear from you as well. You can pop over to my Instagram channel, Renewing Hearts Training, or even message me, or yeah, I was going to say something else, but yeah, now I remember. Leave a comment on Apple Podcasts. I would love to hear from you. What's helpful? What would you like to see more of? That would be amazing. For those of you who are interested in the sand tray training, or my Sandtray trainings in general. I do have one coming up this weekend. It's called Using a Neuroscience and Attachment Lens with Sandtray in Play Therapy. It's a 2-day in-person training. I like to do the in-person training because we do a lot of making sand trays. So you get your hands in the sand, you're creating sand trays. We're using that as opportunities to learn how to identify themes in the sand tray, how to hold that sand tray experience, what to say, what not to say. In this particular training, we're using a neuroscience and attachment lens. So understanding implicit experiences, that sensory aspect, the self-regulating experience for clients, or dysregulating depending on the client, and how to support your clients using Sandtray in the play therapy process with that lens. We do a lot of identifying themes and how to hold that and what to do with that. So that's one of the reasons I keep it a really, really small group. We do a maximum of 12 people. Ideally, we have like 10, usually 10 to 12. And that way we get a lot of hands-on, a lot of individualized experiences. So if you're interested in the training or trainings I have coming up, then pop over to my website at rhplaytherapytraining.com. That is rhplaytherapytraining.com. You can either go on the courses or trainings page, and you'll see the training. Registration for this one closes tomorrow. Using a neuroscience and attachment lens in Sandtray and play therapy. I have some other trainings coming up as well. So if you're interested, pop over to my website. You can also check out the resources over there. We're also putting links in the comments. So if you're interested, you can also check the comments, or feel free to message me if you have questions. And I will see you next week. Bye for now. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I hope you found the discussion valuable and gained new insights and ideas to support your work helping children, adolescents, and families heal. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your feedback helps to improve and reach more people who can benefit from this information. Remember, play therapy is a powerful tool for healing and growth. Whether you're a new play therapist or experienced, I encourage you to continue your learning journey to unlock the potential of play in your own work and relationships. If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on social media and visit my website at Renewing Hearts Play Therapy Training to stay updated on upcoming episodes, trainings, and resources. Thank you once again for listening to Next Level Play Therapy. Until next time, keep playing, learning, and growing.